to Adam.
And welcome.
Welcome to Uncertain Things, the podcast.
Every time we remember to say this, an angel gets their wings. We're in the middle of producing a gazillion shows that we have already recorded, and we have an insane backlog that is being further backlogged because of our crazy supply chain problems, that is our schedules. But barring some calamity that will destroy the grid, we should have some awesome conversations coming up soon.
This is true. There's much in the pipeline.
Including specifically one that I'm just eager to get out with Matt Taibbi, the journalist, that will probably release maybe not next episode, but the one after that. And that connects really neatly with the conversation we just had with Nancy Rommelman about the derangement of media. I mean, fancy that. An Uncertain Things episode about the craziness of media. How novel. But for today, we wanted to take a break, as we sometimes do, from the political emphasis of our media cultural criticism, and just talk about culture. As with our conversations with Ken Goshen, Adam Neely, and Rob Long, it's critical for us to be able to talk about the critical power of art, music, entertainment to interface with our social thinking, whether by reflecting our social and cultural anxieties or by obscuring them. Or, also just by making us happy or sad. Or angry, as we'll get to with our guest. So today's guest is Lindsay Ellis. She's a YouTube media critic, or I should say film critic, more specifically.
Yes. And
film is my jam. And I just love listening to her analysis, even when I find myself disagreeing with her, which is, as you know, even more fun. So I love the chance to talk to her. But one of the excuses wasn't just our shared proclivity to analyze, criticize, and malign cinema, but she's currently releasing the second volume in her sci-fi trilogy, the first of which came out last year, and it's called Axiom's End. It's a riveting, thrilling, and funny read. Highly recommended, especially if you like a good alien invasion and some 2000-aughts Bush era nostalgia. Plus, the themes that run through the book deal with social and cultural dreads that are resoundingly poignant. From bioengineering to transhumanism to government incompetence to the inability to reconcile cross-cultural, and in this case, cross-species norms and core belief systems.
For me, part of what was so interesting about talking with Lindsay was that, right now we have this kind of toxic media landscape where, the wrong kinds of reactions and behaviors to art are incentivized by our algorithms and the tech platforms.
To art, to politics, to everything.
Yeah.
The wrong type of conversations are incentivized broadly.
And Lindsay had a lot to say about that, both as now an author, but also as somebody who spent a lot of time creating criticism. And so she has a really interesting way of talking about, how do you distinguish good faith criticism from bad faith criticism?
And this is something that obviously we talk about a lot on Uncertain Things. And one of the things that were interesting to see through her perspective, I think some videos, if you want to do some further explanation, we'll put it in the show notes. You can watch her video essay about Mel Brooks and comedy. I think it's one of her best videos, just thinking about what constitutes, in that case, it's more a question of comedy and satire, but she really puts a lot of thought into this, the value of good, useful critique and parody and satire, as opposed to just vile vitriol. And also, if you're familiar with her work, you'll have probably heard that she's been through her own rigmarole recently, and which she discusses in her video. I think it's called Mask Off. If you're interested in YouTube world, cancel culture, adjacent drama.
There's also a lot of videos on Disney. So if you're a Disney fan, that's one of her favorite themes.
Actually, yes. And another one of her best videos is her Beauty and the Beast essay. It's like an hour-long review of the live action remake. Highly recommended in general, but also specifically in regards to the question of what's the role of good criticism and how that idea has changed over the ages of the internet. And you should definitely read her book, Axiom End, and the newly released volume, Truth of the Divine.
Mm-hmm. And we start our conversation, talking about Axiom's End. So we start right in the transhumanism of it all.
Oh, and right. And I should apologize, though, that apparently I recorded this episode appropriate to the theme while on Mars. As you can hear in the toilet level quality of my recording, interplanetary travel still has a long way to go in terms of content creation. But don't let that stop you from subscribing to Uncertain Things on uncertain.substack.com or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts in order to stay up to date on our gajillion upcoming episodes. If you can, please take a minute to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps us reach new people and will make Vanessa very, very happy. You can't see her, but she's nodding with doe eyes, big old doe eyes. All right, if you really want to support us and help us carve out more time to create more episodes, you can drop a few schmeckles in our Substack by joining our full paid subscription. We are Uncertain Pod on the social media when we are on the social media, and that's it for the pitch.
All right, and with that, Lindsay Ellis.
I think mostly it was sort of like thinking about like biology and how that would influence the culture. And while at the same time, you can't make it too weird. And it's really easy to make it weird, It's like...
Not to bring in loaded Silicon Valley terminology, but you're also really interested in transhumanism.
Yeah. It's interesting how people really shy away from that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's kind of, it's like, I wouldn't even say it's inevitable. We're kind of already in it, where it's like we have like cybernetic parts, and then you have brain geniuses like Elon Musk trying to figure out how to create neural networks that interface with like iPhones. And it's like tee-hee, but it's like home slice, it's gonna happen. It will happen. And like even things like eugenics, like negative eugenics, it's like we already practice that. People get chromosomal abnormality tests early in pregnancy, and usually will terminate them if that chromosomal abnormality is either incompatible with life, or they just don't want to deal with some whatever special need that abnormality would come with. It's not like eugenics ended. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because a lot of chromosomal abnormalities, it's just like unbelievably cruel to like, especially things like T13 are like babies might live 5 days. Imagine forcing a woman to carry that to term, and 5 days, some women do, and that's their choice, but like to force someone to do that is just unbelievably cruel. And so it's interesting how like, though this reality doesn't really get factored in whenever we talked about, it's just like we already do have light transhumanism. We already do practice at least some form of negative eugenics, and even arguably positive eugenics if you get genetic counseling before you get married,
right?
And like, which a lot of Ashkenazi people have to do, or like, what if you have Tay-Sachs runs on both sides of your family? And like, that's another disease that is incompatible with life after a certain age. So, it's a thing that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I think it's easier to deal with when it's aliens. Like,
right.
Yes, they like clearly eugenicists, clearly, post-natural, post-human, cybernetic, but it's aliens. So it's easier to let that go because we don't have to see our own fraught history with these things, especially when you like take class into account, and how whenever we look into our future, knowing like these things, it's just like, it's going to be really class-based, and it's going to be really ugly.
Right.
And we don't know how that's going to play out.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So in a way, you avoided dealing with that problem by not having overtly class.
I think it's just like I avoided dealing with the problem by not making it about humans.
Right.
I think it's like it's
casts,
easier.
Though.
Oh yeah, but it's the caste system. Yeah, exactly. It's just like I wasn't about to be like, so like in the Indian caste system, it's like this and this, it's just like that. Yeah, it was easier just to kind of make it subtext instead of text.
Right.
Because whenever you draw these things back into the human world, it just makes people be like, ugh.
But it's true that the buddy taboos are they're true to all of humanity broadly, but they're very strong in the U.S., which always fascinated me. I think you can see that around sexuality, and you certainly around abortion.
Yeah.
And just wondering, as a writer, we're also going to ask you a little bit about you as a critic, but I'm interested in you as a writer. Do you feel like I don't know, titillated or excited about pressing these taboos, or are they something that they're just part of your broad curiosity that you wanted to explore, but you don't necessarily want to make people feel uncomfortable?
I'm not worried about making people feel uncomfortable. I'm worried about bad faith, people taking this and, you say, making a big movement out of it, like, oh, you're clearly a eugenicist or something like that, by stating the true thing, which is that we do practice some form of negative eugenics here in the United States.
Right.
And it's weird that we don't, admit that. But it's kind of hard to write around, like, how do you, try to anticipate these sort of, like, if you want to criticize me for a thing that's there, that's one thing. But if you want to, like, take something out of context and, turn it into this big, like, just thing out of nothing, then it's just like it's just easier to, like, not use certain words or but on the other hand, people still do that, like,
right, no matter what words you use.
I have a bunch of people that, like, are very, like, they still like to hassle me about the main relationship in Axiom's End, because the alien does some pretty unscrupulous things throughout the narrative, but especially early in the narrative. And it's just sort of like, oh, you made a narrative where your, kidnapper falls in love with her abuser. And it's just like, man, you must have really hated Beauty and the Beast. Like, but it's just, and like stuff like that is frustrating because it, like, doesn't feel like good faith to me, because it's okay, well, if this is a bridge too far, what is okay? Because I didn't want to frame it like it was 100% every hunky-dory. Obviously, that's why there's a series. It gets a lot more, I get it kind of complicated, and their relationship is extremely difficult in the second book.
It's so crazy. I didn't know that you actually were getting criticism about that particular angle. And for just context, without spoiling too much, one of the first interactions between the human protagonist Cora and the alien ampersand is essentially mind control.
Yeah,
thoroughly enough for it to not be a big spoiler. And it is from this point on that the relationship develops.
Yeah, it's like that's how they meet, is mind control.
Mind control, obviously, of the alien of the human. And you deal with it like you straight up. Like the word consent is literally in the book, discussing that and a lot, and like struggling with this question and trying to see to what extent they can get past that. And also, to me, again, most interestingly of all, to what extent their understanding of words like consent or of the idea of a relationship even corresponds, being completely two different species.
Yeah. Because he's not sorry about that at any point in the narrative. Like, even at the end where he's like, I pet, I like you now. Like, he's never apologetic for, like, not only what he did to her, but he did it to, like, a bunch of people just as, like, experiments. And he's like, what? I needed to do it.
Right. And it doesn't have the Beast moment of, I want to do something nice for her.
Yeah. He's like, I did what I had to do, man. I'm sorry, not sorry. And, I feel like that's another one of those sort of, like, irreconcilable differences where it's just like, what do you do if someone does something pretty terrible and never really understands why it's terrible? You can either cut them out of your life, or you just kind of like, well, move on. And at least at the end of the first book, that's kind of what they do. Although, obviously that's not the end of it.
Right.
But yes, like, writing around stuff like that is frustrating. I also had a few people that, like, didn't like, there's a fairly major character who's Jewish and also kind of a jerk.
Oh, I was going to say that you're clearly anti-Semitic, that your main Jewish character.
I've heard that a few times. And I like, sort of like, he's like, his character is only, like, more important going on. And, like, it just bothers me how it's like, you're not allowed to have, like, character flaws that you grow from, you start.
No, it's also so frustrating. Like, I'm my name may suggest Jewish. I think it's going to be a revelation to my audience. I remember during the book, I was anticipating that comment. Just so stupid. Also, Jews are allowed to be villains without, like, the subtext being You know what? Let's start preparing for the second Holocaust.
Yeah.
Bernie Madoff is Jewish. It's okay. It's okay.
I guess the thing is, like, if nothing bad happens to, or if this is like kind of hashtag problematic, then the alternative is like everybody has to be white, and because
you're not allowed to write on anybody who's not.
Yeah, it's just like if you kill a minority or a queer character, or if a minority or queer character is like kind of an asshole, it's just because I did think about that, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to like rewrite it to make it so that like nothing bad happens, or they don't, or they don't do anything bad, because like that's the ironic thing about that character is he's probably one of my favorite characters. He's a point of view character in the third book, and it's fun being able to like have a growth, but in order to have character growth you kind of need to start from a point that merits growing,
right?
Right,
because the alternative is only white characters, or to have incredibly flat one-dimensional minority characters that, like you're saying, that don't grow, or that just buy into some sort of kind of narrative of the like whatever it might be that people want, like they're gonna be great, and that's all that we want out of our art. It's interesting for me to watch someone go from being a critic to a creator, and I'm sure that you were a creator like while you were critiquing, but you were more well known for your criticism, and now you're kind of more fully kind of putting yourself out there as an author first and foremost. And I guess for me, it's really interesting because now that you were always in your criticism, you were always kind of distinguishing between kind of good faith criticism and bad faith criticism. And distinguishing between like when it's an actual valid argument versus when it's just kind of like lazy or off the cuff. I'm curious, now that you're receiving criticism, has that distinction become even more kind of imprinted upon you now that you're receiving the criticism for your art, or has your distinction shifted in any way or solidified? Or
a little, because I feel like I definitely get I definitely get more than someone else in my shoes would get, because I think with a lot of people, there is definitely this sort of urge to be like, haha, shoes on the other foot. And so, because definitely, like I've seen people be really frustrated, like there's one bookseller that was like on Twitter talking about like, there is like such mixed reviews to this book, but there's zero consistency with what the problem actually is, so it'll be like, some people think the protagonist is too stupid. Some people think she's too like way too adept, way too smart. It'll be like or there had just been like such a wide array of what the problem was. And then the weird thing is like there's some criticism that I like agreed with. I'm not gonna say what it was, but there was a lot of people who didn't like it, and for reasons that I'm like, yeah, no, you're right. But at the same time, like there were, I feel like there was definitely this urge to kind of like put me in my place, because there was just such, there wasn't really consistency with what the problem actually was. And that I felt was a little telling, because it was like, it's just like if there isn't really any, consistent through line with what the problem is, then it's just like, that just kind of seems like maybe people are taking it up just for the joy of saying that I can dish it out but I can't take it.
Do you have like the Lindsay Ellis guide for identifying bad faith criticism? Like, if the person does XYZ, therefore you can tell they didn't actually grapple with the art. I feel like
the number one thing is if they are...
The through line doesn't exist.
The through line is, does it feel like they're going to get a lot of social media attention? That is kind of the first and foremost. I mean, you laugh, but that is sort of like kind of the first and foremost, like, reason why people do this in the first place. Like, why bother wasting energy unless you think you're going to get something out of it? And now it's, like upvotes and likes and retweets and engagement, and like even if that is negative engagement, like you see this on Goodreads all the time, where if they're like I haven't looked at it, but I know there are some like really highly rated reviews that are so highly rated, or highly rated negative reviews that are like really bumped up by their algorithm because there's a lot of fighting in the comments. And so like
that's fun.
That's sort fun. Of there is incentive to that sort of thing, even if that incentive is getting in like fights on Twitter. So, is it fashionable? Are you like, just trying to be contrarian? That sort of like tends to be the big incentive for bad faith.
And what's heartbreaking to me about this, so much so that I just poured myself another glass of whiskey, is that actually, as somebody who is in the criticism journalism world, it's just so tragic, because there is, which is going back to your YouTube career. Good criticism is so valuable. Being able to actually look at other people's work and think about it meaningfully, criticize a thing that's shitty, it's good. It increases our ability to actually enjoy the art and then encourage better art from the next crop of creators like yourself, that I'm sure that you have incorporated some. But those incentives that lead people to just be vicious, it's just decreasing all the good things about artistic discourse, and it's heartbreaking. It makes me sad. Anyway, that was just an insertion. There's no question there.
Again, to go back to this thing about engagement, is the reality is negative reviews do tend to get attraction. Like, thing is terrible, this is why. Like, there is definitely real incentive. Like, if you look at my channel, like, the mean stuff does way better numbers than anything that's positive. And that's just, because there is like some catharsis to taking down, a piece of art. It feels like punching up. And, there are things like Game of Thrones where, like, of course that's going to be really popular because it, was popularly regarded badly and people feel robbed. So content like that is going to do well. And, and so it's kind of, it's easy to see where entire channels will spring up that are like less about criticism so much as like just monetizing negativity, CinemaSins being the most obvious, where it's like, they originally kind of marketed themselves as like speaking truth to power, and it's like, come on, come on, really. And I as time has gone on, I think people kind of see through that more. And they kind of revised course and it's like, no, it's just jokes. But it's just there is a lot of incentive to be negative. And so people will find reasons to be negative, even if it's not super, super valid.
You did a great job in your Game of Thrones review that you just brought up, making sure to distinguish between the valid criticism and any desire to create hate mobs against either the actors or the people actually involved in the process, which sometimes gets lost because people feel so strongly about.
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't see that, and I followed all of the hate mobs because I feel all of the ire was at the showrunners. It still is, and rightly so, in my opinion, because they like were rushing it so they could get onto like their Netflix deal in Star Wars, and now they have neither. Sometimes justice is real.
But I guess more with the you reference, I think, in that video, like the mobs that Star Wars created towards some of the actors, and that's it's just a shame. It's like the energy sometimes is good. It's nice to see such engagement with the work, but come on. Anyway.
But I mean, Adam, yesterday when you were bringing up the Game of Thrones video and you and I were talking about it, I think one of the questions you wanted to ask Lindsay, and I guess I'm going to ask it right now, but it's just, I mean, what do artists owe their audiences? Do they owe them something? Like, should they be?
Well, I don't think there's such thing as owe. Like, owe implies a debt. However, I think it's like they, shouldn't be too surprised if they, become so detached from their own audience and they just have such a big swing that there would be such a backlash. I don't think anyone is owed anything where media is concerned. However, I think that the backlash to Game of Thrones was absolutely deserved because it was like so obvious that they just weren't putting the care and attention in those 2 seasons that they had in earlier seasons. And, kind of had such little respect for their audience that they didn't think anyone would notice. And so, of course, people kind of felt insulted and, it like just like idiots for wasting so much time in it. Like I certainly did, where it is amazing how it's like I used to rewatch earlier seasons all the time and I have not touched it since we finished those videos 2 years ago, And so I guess that's the weird thing about like fan backlash and like when is it valid, when isn't it? I don't think there's like a line.
Right.
But I do think that you know, there's also this really troubling trend of studios just kowtowing to whatever fans want. Whenever there are these sort of like backlashes that are ultimately like a really small minority, but a very loud minority, like Ghostbusters, where like that backlash was so intense that the studio was like, cool, well, we're going to try again. We're going to retcon the existence of that entire movie, and we're going to make something that will appease the type of person that created that backlash in the first place. You know, basically just so it's just like, when is it valid? Where I would say like the, you know, Game of Thrones backlash was valid, where the Ghostbusters one was not. I don't know. You know, I obviously that feels correct to me. But you know, I guess the Ghostbusters fans felt insulted in the same way that like Game of Thrones fans did. And so, but I do think it's troubling how like how studios are like trying so hard to like, you know, conform to like a, you know, avoid expectations, but be conform to audience expectations, and, you know, give the most toxic forms of or toxic side of their fandom what they want. Like that last Star Wars movie, brutal. The movie was so bad.
Right. Basically, what you're saying is when you go either way, if you completely ignore it, it's probably going to be a catastrophe. But if you completely give into it, it's probably also going to be a catastrophe.
I don't think personally, I don't even see it as necessarily pandering to your audience so much as creating fan service for the stereotype of the fans that you have in your mind, rather than actually trying to understand what it is that appreciated about the work itself.
That last Star Wars movie pleased nobody. Like nobody liked it except for the people who like went in like, I'm gonna like it no matter what. You know, and like it was clearly made for people who were mad at The Last Jedi. And like, were those people happy? I think for the most part probably not, because it was just such a clumsy movie that built not at all on what came before it. And like it felt very rushed, and then like with the like haphazard way Carrie Fisher was jammed in, it was just a mess. So it's just like, in this attempt to please everybody, they please nobody.
Right.
We have Game of Thrones is like kind of on the other end of the spectrum, where they're like, yeah, we're gonna take risks just like The Sopranos, and end up pissing everybody off. But again, I think that just kind of goes back not so much to the fact that they took risks, but the fact that like they just lost respect for the intelligence of their audience. Like, any risk is a good risk. Yeah. It's like, no, not all risks are good.
Yeah.
This is not the same as killing off Ned Stark in season 1. It's not the same thing.
So we interviewed Rob Long, who was the screenwriter for Cheers, and has done a lot of cool, interesting stuff in Hollywood. He has a podcast called Martini Shot, where he kind of talks about all things Hollywood in little bite-sized bits. And we asked him, because, you know, Adam especially, because he's like he is a film nerd. I'm an amateur. But we asked him, like, what the hell is going on with Hollywood? Like, how do you diagnose why so much that's produced feels kind of flat and soulless and clearly made, you know, for a buck or two, or like where's the heart of Hollywood gone, basically? And he said the problem is there's no truth anymore. Nobody wants to write the truth.
I'll tell you what the problem is. Problem is there's less money and less studios. There are like 2 studios now, and they have a monopoly, and of course most of it's Disney. Disney controls the vast majority of the market, and they make incredibly safe product for their audience. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
But when you agree that there's less truth, that there are less real subjects that the medium is willing to engage with?
What, then Ghostbusters? Like, less true than what? Like, what are we comparing it to? Like, yeah, you know what's true? Twister. That's some true shit right there. Bring me back to the 90s, man. When like Waterworld. Woo! Yeah, no, come on. What are we comparing this to?
You do not buy into that.
No, I don't buy into that. I think it's like, the thing right now is just there's people are desperately moving to television. Like, you know, television is where all the interesting new ideas are being made. Television is where all the money is. You know, television is flush with cash, especially now after COVID. There's just no money in film anymore. Especially because like a lot of films are just being released straight to streaming. So like, you know, that's, but I really enjoy like Succession. I think HBO does really good dramas. Like, you know, I also think they do really good documentary. Amazon, like what's it, the Neil Gaiman Terry Pratchett thing that came out last year.
Good Omens.
Good Omens.
Yeah, Good Omens. Like, yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff being made. I just, none of it resonates with me right now, just because I'm you know, my brain is just so wired to turning things into content. I just can't like engage with things emotionally anymore.
Wow. So I remember when we talked with Adam Neely about being able to do music after like actually becoming a music educator, and to what extent that diminished his ability to appreciate music. So you really feel that you're the content machine in your brain is lowered your ability to just enjoy screen work?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason why I've like kind of gone all in on like theater. Like I just don't enjoy movies and television anymore. I'm just sick of it.
When did you realize that?
About a year ago.
Was there a specific show that you were watching and you're like, I think
Well,
I
it's
should?
more that I just avoid. I just was viscerally avoiding things, and if I did watch something, it was just so I would be a part of the discourse, and you know, like, you know, like WandaVision. I didn't particularly care about that, but I watched it and it was fine. Because like none of the Disney Plus stuff does anything for me. I don't think it's bad. I think it's, you know, again, like I think most of what's going on Disney Plus is better superhero stuff than anything that like came out in the 90s or 2000s. I just, you know, burnt out on the MCU. I'm just over it. And it's kind of wild to me that people are still like, yeah, MCU. I'm like, my God, it's been 10 years nonstop.
Right.
It never ends. You know, like same with Falcon. I liked Loki. I think Loki, I genuinely like felt a feeling, and until I thought the last episode was kind of disappointing. But yeah, I that almost made me an emotion.
Is that something that you resent about your profession?
Yeah. Yep. Let's just say it won't be long for this world. We are wrapping up an epoch.
I had a friend who became like an Instagram influencer because he took amazing photos, and then at a certain point he just completely stopped like cold turkey because it was just exhausting. You no longer are doing the art for the art. You're doing it for
you're doing it for money. You're doing it for engagement, and especially on YouTube, like if your engagement drops, it shames you, it negs you, it tells you, you know, like, this is a problem, you need to do better, you need to change title, you need to change thumbnail, like, you know, blames you for the numbers doing poorly, and it's just like it's a recipe for misery.
Right. Is that different? Oh, sorry. Is that different from when you started? Like, has it like?
Absolutely, yeah. Like you know, the algorithm has just become more and more dominant, not just on YouTube but across all platforms. And I just feel like no matter how much they try to moderate it, any platform that is primarily algorithm driven is going to turn into trash sooner or later, usually sooner. And it's just going to create a misery machine that's impossible to keep up with, especially for small creators who are just like one person. And you know, it's just like if it's your Twitter account or it's your YouTube account is telling you people are less interested in you, people are not clicking. That's how it's framed. People are clicking on this video less. Here's what we suggest to fix that. It's a recipe for misery, and everyone I know is burnt out and miserable.
But I mean,
so there's no joy in the YouTube world.
No, I can't think. I like everyone I know is like, at least my personal friends, like every burnt out. Everybody's just stressing out, trying to think of how to stay relevant, trying to think of how to keep their numbers up. That's why a lot of people only release like 2 or 3 videos a year now, where it'll be just like going all in on one thing. And if that one thing does poorly, then you're just sunk.
Yeah. This is the thing that makes me worried about it, right? Because if people are like, okay, we'll go back to books, but then if there's no like economic model for it, then where does that leave creators?
And it's like, how do you advertise it? You have to use social media. And that is, again, fucking algorithm generated.
Yeah.
You know, it's I guess we'll see. It's so far it's been okay for me. But again, I've had like this large platform that I could use.
Right.
So I won't have that, at least, you know, no more than any other author will. So
right. I'll just say.
Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. We'll be back next week, or actually a week after that, with more melancholic ruminations full of despair about the way we communicate. Follow us on uncertain.substack.com and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Till next time, stay sane.